person. This is my first in-person episode. I've basically done Zoom every time, and Trevor's done with Zoom. So we have our in between two ferns set up here, where we're actually doing it in the flesh. So, and you were saying with law school and everything that you're doing, even with our book club, have you just been sequestered in their house all the time?
Yeah.
Or you're just desperate to get out?
Yeah, well, it's been really hard because my partner is caring for a relative who's vulnerable to COVID, so we've had to be super careful this entire summer. I haven't really seen anybody in person, even my family in town, for months.
Wow.
So I came back we went to Pennsylvania for a little while, and I came back early for school. My partner's still over there, Ben, and his relative.
Oh, okay.
And so I can be a little not quite as careful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still being pretty careful, but getting tested for COVID every week at ASU.
Wow.
Thanks, ASU.
Like the up into the nasal cavity one?
No,
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Have you done that one?
No.
I've done it once. It's well, I like to tell people I've had a nose job, but nothing like aesthetic. Deviated septum correction. So just basically straightening the cartilage in between the two.
But people often do get little adjustments, don't they, when they do that?
Yeah. I asked them to, take a little bit here. No, I didn't ask for anything. So that was a miserable experience, frankly, because I had I guess you'd call it a stint or something, holding it together for a week.
Ooh.
And it was just having something in your nose the whole time. So, but anyway, I've had a lot of stuff stuck up in there, obviously when I had the surgery, but also before and after. And it's not pleasant, but it reminded me of that. So, but when I did get a COVID test a while ago because I was sick, and so but it was the one where they scrape just under your skull, basically. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they keep on going and going. It's like, are we like a foot behind my skull already? It feels like it's going on forever. But it's just very invasive. It's like, oh my gosh. No, that's good though. But it sounds like you're being responsible. But I think even though we're living on the edge here, meeting together in person, I think it's okay. We're at this point.
I hope so.
That'll be the most controversial aspect of what we discussed tonight.
I'd feel pretty terrible if I came down with it, in the next week or something.
I know, right? And then Todd and Trevor were dead the next week. No.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, so that's the controversial bit right there, that we're here. But no, it is good to get in person, so this is fun. And welcome to my home. Halloween decorations are getting going. So I'm going off just what you said you wanted to talk about before, but we can talk about anything. But but as I recall, it was something to the effect of you've never just kind of put together a summary of your belief in God and mm-hmm. kind of the nature of it and explaining it, and because it's a big topic and
yeah, and it's important to me, and that's why I've been kind of nervous about doing this and second thought it a little bit. Mm-hmm. I've tried, because I remember trying to explain in college to a classmate of mine who in China, one of my American classmates, who later on I found out is transgender, so mm-hmm. who knows what was going on in her mind at the time. But we had a really deep conversation one night. She just asked, how do you believe in God? Because knowing I was from BYU, and I felt like I did a really terrible job trying to explain myself. But it was a good conversation, but I wish I could have done better. And then I was telling you that one of my siblings asked me the other day, how can you believe in God? Because she's kind of away from the church pretty much, and her boyfriend is very puzzled that, I guess, hearing that I'm kind of religious in my way.
Yeah.
And just asking, and I felt kind of bad that I don't represent that better, I guess, or that we haven't talked about it. So this is
Sure.
So this is kind of my effort to try jumping into the abyss, and also maybe getting that explanation out for my relative or for my sister and other siblings and anyone else.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, happy to have you. And I think a lot of us have been there where it's like you're kind of caught like a deer between the headlights with, giving some type of explanation, and then it just doesn't come out right.
Yeah, and it's annoying because you think about it so much,
right?
But then when the time comes to articulate it, it's like,
yeah.
yeah.
I feel like I've gotten better, but that's only by
Practice.
Doing it a lot. Yeah. I did have somebody ask very unexpectedly, not anyone I really knew very well, but kind of asked me like, what are your views on religion? And I felt like it went okay, but I had been like doing this type of stuff and the stuff I was talking about that Heather and I had done in the past, and so I felt like, I'm finally getting to a point where I got a little bit of I wouldn't say an elevator speech, but at least some ideas that are kind of there to pull from. But,
it's good to have. So some just brief background, because it's going to come up for anybody who happens to wander onto this and has no idea who I am. So I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My family have all been very strong in it, or Mormon. I still consider myself Mormon, even though apparently that's not the orthodox way to consider yourself anymore.
To refer to it, yeah.
But I consider myself Mormon. Like when people ask, I usually say, well, yeah, to you I'm Mormon. To Mormons, maybe not.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
But I'm also gay, so there was like this whole big transition kind of thing, and that influenced a lot my experience, which isn't the point of what I want to talk about, but it'll definitely come up. So I realized in college at some point, maybe in high school, probably a little after, probably really crystallized after my mission, that just how my religious experience and my idea of God in general is irrational. And I could admit that to myself.
Okay, yeah.
Like there's no way to prove the existence of God as I experience him, or just in general, I think. And I'm okay with that. And I think part of the discomfort that a lot of people have with the idea of God is that they feel like there has to be some closer tie with a rational understanding, and like it's just uncomfortable for people. But for me, I realized, even before I could admit that to myself, my whole life, I feel like I've always been of two minds almost. There's the rational mind that kind of looks at the world as it is and operates based on that. But then my religious experience is not tied to that, but it's still equally real, just subjective. And I think what has kept me, like I consider that I believe in God, and saying that I don't think I could prove the existence of God, even to myself, which is weird, right?
Yeah.
And yet somehow I'm comfortable with the idea of believing in God to the point of acting on it.
Oh, okay.
And like, what does that mean, acting on it? For me, in my experience, that's been through primarily prayer and my interactions with the church and church community. And so, also another way I consider myself Mormon is that even though, like, I have this idea of God in my mind, kind of a a personal operative theology maybe, and it's very much tied into the theology of Mormonism. I can't see myself getting away from that. Like no other Christian theology, not that I've looked into them very deeply, appeals to me as much, because my personal experience is so related to what I've experienced and known as my interaction with God.
Yeah. Yeah. So so very much of a personal relationship, right? So yeah. Well, and that's interesting because I guess relationships are more on the irrational side anyway, right? So,
right. Yeah, that's true.
So that makes a lot of sense. And participation in a religious community, that makes sense. So is that, and that's something you still are involved with a lot, or?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay, that's. But you want to be, or?
Yeah, I do actually want to be. Yeah. So a few years ago, I started going to my local ward, and I was very open with the bishop about it. And I told him, I'm gay and unrepentant, but I would like to go to church and maybe be more active.
Yeah.
Like, what are we going to do about this? I know of people, one person in particular who I look up to in his activity in the church who's excommunicated, ironically, kind of. Like, as far as to participate as much as I can in the church community, what do we need to do? Like, I'm going to be realistic about it.
Right, yeah.
And he said, oh, no, we don't need to worry about that. Basically, more or less. I went to that local ward for a few months, but it just kind of faded out because it's easier to not do anything on Sunday when you're used to it.
Sure.
And now, even if I want to get back into it, it's not really happening.
You'd have to do Zoom.
I know.
Zoom!
I know. I don't know if I could handle that necessarily.
Well, it'll transition out eventually.
Eventually, maybe when I'm at a point where I'll be ready to get back into it again.
Maybe it'll align perfectly. Yeah. Well, and I totally relate to the desire and appeal of church participation. And I've especially appreciated that in the past few years, living where I do. I mean, I basically loved every ward I've been in, but I've been in my current ward for 6 years. So I'm definitely established and have a lot of close relationships, and so kind of to the point where with a lot of people in my ward, I couldn't imagine being without them, and I get why, like, when people move, that it's so hard because you're cutting off those relationships. I guess hopefully it's a little easier now with Facebook keeping in touch, but it's still not the same. You don't see each other in person every week, so I guess I just have to live here for the rest of my life now. But I really value it, and in teaching primary, doing singing in primary, seeing the kids get older, and watching them, move on in their lives to different things. It's just a wonderful experience, and I can see that community aspect of it being.
Yeah, and for me, there's something extra about the community through that paradigm of religion. Yeah. Because you can get social community in any number of ways. But there's something about the shared experience that kind of ties your subjective experience together. And I think what turns people off, kind of in line with what I was talking about this idea of having to fix God and objective reality. I think a lot of people get hung up on the mythology of religion, which is understandable, but at the same time, I think it's very valuable as far as getting people. I mean, I guess for hundreds or thousands of years or whatever, it's been a big way that we get people to talk together and form standards about these things. Not just standards, but like set almost a certain philosophical outlook on how we look at things that we wouldn't talk about otherwise. Like outside of the mythology, some people will have philosophical conversations and like, why is this good and how do we value different things? But most people don't.
Right.
But when you're in Sunday school, even if it's in the context of some story which on its own may or may not have any particular deep meaning, but you give it meaning just through the interaction of everyone talking about it. And I think that's actually really valuable.
Yeah, totally. So when you were saying people get hung up on it, like it turns people off to religion.
Yeah, like why does the world have to be created in 6 days?
Right.
All this sort of stuff. But, and I think you understand it doesn't have to be. Like, it's that dual minds kind of thing. Like, for some reason we have this tradition and it's stood the test of time. Why is that? There must be something of value here. Like, let's talk about it and look at it.
Yeah.
And think how this story, like, why it appeals to us over the generations and what we can get out of it.
That's a very interesting point. Like, because I definitely abstract things a lot, and it's a useful thing to do, but it's definitely not the normal way to do things, right? Like you said, most people in approaching any type of subject aren't just going to start talking about it directly. But like in Sunday school, we frame it around stories that kind of give us a latch, an entry point into. Yeah, that's and I'm thinking even like in both Judaism and Christianity and that history, there's a lot of discussions on different topics, even if they aren't strictly religious, or they could be kind of taken out of their religious home. They're all centered around like the Bible or like rabbinic tradition, getting into lots of issues, but around Torah, to bring it up in the first place. And yeah, I mean, probably a lot of major ideas and important concepts I first was exposed to in a Sunday school or primary setting, to one degree of complexity or another. Yeah, I mean, and even so, like, even if we're not religious, we're probably doing it with movies or literature or something. Probably a lot of science fiction gets in that direction. So it'd be, it's very unusual to not have any of that.
Yeah,
and probably not as interesting either. Yeah, so that's something that that keeps you intrigued by it and interested in it.
Yep. And even if I'm not acting on it in the moment, like even if I'm not regularly reading the scriptures or praying, like it's always in the back of my mind. It's always kind of framing my experience, and I know that I can go back to that, and I do for certain sometimes.
Yeah. And do you have do you have religious experiences, what you would describe as religious experiences that have also, do you want to talk about some of those? Or?
Yeah, sure. Just speaking generally, so I guess in Mormonism we talk about having a testimony and having things confirmed through the way you feel, which has its pluses and minuses, I guess.
Yeah.
So I speak kind of in those terms, but definitely I feel like from a very young age I felt a connection to God and an ability to communicate and feel the Holy Spirit and this kind of thing. And I think that's not uncommon for gay people, actually, at least who've grown up religious. And I was thinking about that on the way over here, actually. It takes... I don't know. I guess it takes a lot more commitment in a way, even if you don't realize it. Like, I didn't think... Because I didn't know any other experience but my own, but Like I remember having really just conflicting thoughts about things, like as a teenager, and very much a lot of uncertainty about the future and how I could realize any kind of meaningful potential, and feeling pretty bad about it, and turning to, I guess, the promise and hope of God's hopes for me to kind of keep me going and give me strength, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is weird because at the same time, it was also the source of a lot of that uncertainty.
Yeah.
Like I probably would have turned out differently if I had grown up like in some stereotypically liberal household where sexual orientation doesn't matter. You just talk about it.
Right.
And it's, I don't know, it would be different. But it's still so meaningful. Like there's just something about being, I don't know, like the intensity of that inner conflict almost heightens the religious experience. Not almost, it does. It totally does. I think. And it kind of appeals to me a bit. Like I say, if I'd grown up a devout Catholic, I would totally be a priest. Like I would just go right into that, especially after going on my mission and having, like I had a really good mission experience. For me, it felt like I was doing meaningful work. I wasn't about the numbers of baptisms or anything. Like my goal was to get people to feel the Spirit, whatever that means, you know, so that they would make improvements in their lives that would bring them to God. And in my faith that there's this universal truth, if I'm doing it right, if the universal truth is actually there and working, then they'll naturally be led to it if they're going that way. And otherwise, like, let's just talk and help you get a better, feeling better about things. And especially, well, yeah, I mean, it was really cool. And being on my mission, I thought, my gosh, I can see why people want to go start churches.
Yeah.
You know? I'd be all about that.
Yeah.
Like, just go start a faith community and help people connect to that mythology and connect to each other.
Yeah. I wish that's kind of how I feel now. I wish I'd felt more like that on my mission. I mean, I think I did a little bit, but I also did, I think, have a more of the focus on hitting certain numbers.
I was lucky because I was Chinese speaking in Canada, so I felt no pressure from the mission bureaucracy at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was fantastic.
Oh.
Because we'd get, like, at zone conferences, we'd interview with the APs or whatever, and I just thought it was so distasteful. Like, there were a couple of them that I really admired and thought, like, these are genuinely good people who are doing genuinely good work. And then there are the numbers-centric ones. I'd just be like, oh, please.
Yeah. If I could go back, I would do it differently. But I remember in my last area, it was kind of an unusual assignment where it's kind of like in the middle of nowhere. But so I was going in to fill in for a guy who was just ending his mission. He was kind of showing me around before my new companion kind of. But we were studying one morning. We were just reading something, and he was reading and out loud, and then just kind of paused and pondered. He's like, sometimes I wish I could just go and start over again with what I know now. And he was a really good guy, very much, I think, like what you described, wanted to have these connections with people and very personal. And that struck me, because I thought the same thing later on. It's like, that would be interesting. And I actually have gone back and keep in touch with people in Paraguay. Have a bit of a different, because I know some people who were active in the church when I was there, but aren't now. And but it's okay. It's having those relationships is important, and but I like this idea of helping people to basically just have a relationship with God, and find some, I guess, greater depth and meaning. I don't know if that's how you would describe it, but that's what comes to mind. You mentioned something that I thought was kind of interesting, and I don't know if there's anything to this, but just thought I'd pursue it. So you mentioned how the kind of tension, creating strong emotions, that you kind of like that. So something I've thought about in just life and emotional issues, depression, things like that. Sometimes there's this desire to just have a numbness, to just kind of shut down and take everything to like ground state, and not feel anything. Not that I've ever experienced that, but so I've heard. But that sounds very different from what you were describing, because it sounds like there's more like a strenuous mood, or wanting motion, and these poles between the positive and negative. But anyway, I guess there's not really a question there, but I'm just interested in hearing your response to that. How you feel about that, and how that's been in your life.
So it is interesting, and I think your summary there characterized pretty well how I felt. Now, interestingly, I should note that when I started coming out, acknowledging to myself that yes, I'm gay, and beyond that, realizing the implications for adult life. Because in the church, it's so easy. You're just on the set path. You don't really have to think. There's always this sense of foreboding and dread, because something is going to happen that's not going to be good at some point. Mm-hmm. But it's easy to put it off. Mm-hmm. And so, about the time I realized I couldn't keep going the way I was when I had an internship in Hong Kong. And I had a roommate, but I basically lived alone. All of my social activity was through the local Mandarin-speaking branch and through the church in general there, which was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. But I was very unhappy and realized that I couldn't keep going on the way I was and be happy. And so there was this years-long process of figuring out what I valued and whether I would allow myself to go against what I so strongly believed. And the crappy situation for a devout gay Mormon is that no matter what you do, you're going to have to go against something that you fundamentally believe. There's no way around it. You're going to be wrenched from what you feel is natural. So it was a years-long process, and it was aided by my being away in China, working as a visa officer. And I still had contact with the church through my local branch, which in a consulate of 30 American employees, 6 of them were LDS. Wow. Which is just crazy. Yeah. I mean, we had enough there between their families to be a branch, basically. But they were also cool, open-minded foreign service people, so it was very non-threatening. And I was able to separate myself from the culture a little bit and not feel so much of the pressure, and realize that when I got home I would need to just separate from the church for a while completely. And what that means is not just from the church, but from spiritual practice even, because for me, prayer in particular had always been super important, and having what I felt like is a relationship with God where He's checking in on me, I'm being accountable in some way, and just hand, it's a really difficult idea. Like, if I put my mind back in that mindset back before that transition, thinking ahead to that would sound terrible. Like, why would I want to give up this thing that's so important to me? My relationship with God and my connection that I feel that holds me to, that keeps my subjective experience ordered, you know. But the fact of it is that if I'm opening up more to being gay, that's not compatible with the ordering of my subjectivity.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it exactly.
Right.
So on the one hand, praying is this really powerful thing, and on the other hand, it's tainted by this. It's like the male power in the Wheel of Time books. On the one hand, it's this great thing, the spirituality, but on the other hand, it carries with it associations of all this feeling of unworthiness and never reaching potential, or not just not reaching it, but not being able to, like being cut off. And I had to just like not do anything religious for years until I could feel comfortable where what I'm experiencing is consonant with my objective reality, and then I can realign my subjective experience now much more comfortably.
Sure.
Like now I feel like, well, like I did when I went to my neighborhood ward, I could march into the bishop and say, hey, I'm gay, I'm unrepentant, what are we going to do about that? Whereas in the past, I just couldn't have done that. It would have been too fraught.
Yeah. So it sounds like at a certain point that tension became too much. Is that correct? So
And
you found it like, I guess, kind of inspiring in high school, but yeah, when it started getting to the point where you're having to take responsibility for it as an adult.
Yeah, I think a big power of the religious experience is how it orders your subjective experience.
Yeah.
But you still have these objective factors that you're dealing with. And my religious experience as I was experiencing it did not account for my objective reality.
Yeah.
And so it just had to stop. There had to be some kind of realignment or I would go crazy.
But and then it sounds like you've moved closer to that kind of realignment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Now I'm where I feel like I can pursue spiritual practice again.
Right.
And again, I'm lazy, and as I'm saying, I think part of the reason I'm lazy is because I've always had this extra motive in the past to pursue that out of a feeling of deficit, whereas now I feel more whole, so I can kind of set it aside, and it's a bonus when I go after it. But if I'm busy with things on Sunday, it's easy not to go to church.
Sure. Oh, that's interesting. So, it was a deficit before your experiences in China.
Yeah, before that whole process, not just being in China.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not to say that I consciously felt that there was that lacking there, but I mean, because I don't have anyone's experience to compare to my own, so as far as I know, it's normal. But like looking back, I had to put a lot more effort into maintaining that subjective space with my objective reality.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I've never thought of it in those terms, but I kind of have this idea of like people's religious experiences change over time, from childhood to adulthood, and then throughout adulthood. Most likely, not always, but approaching things as like trying to fill a deficit is interesting. I could see that. Maybe people don't think of it in that way, but I could see that being a thing for a long time. But that seems like it's a very different way of looking at it, more as I guess something adding on to rather than filling a void.
Yeah, and let me be clear what I mean by deficit. It's not like something that I feel like I'm lacking exactly, because that feeling of lack is instilled in me by that subjective experience.
Well, right. Well, I think I understand. I mean, very particular in your case, but I mean, in a sense, one of the I wouldn't even say this is necessarily a bad thing, but we're made to feel a little bit this tension, right? That there's got to be something, there's got to be some motive to want, if you're looking for salvation, you have to feel the threat of damnation, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And I don't mean to bash that at all. I think that, I mean, that has so many applications. Beyond just life. I mean, even if you're thinking of a story, right? What makes the story compelling is you have to have some type of conflict that's going to be there, that has to be resolved in some way. So I don't mean to say that it's a bad thing, but
I don't think it is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing in general. Mm-hmm. In the specific case of something like gay and Mormon, it is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, but even considering that, like you're saying, it is very powerful in the time, as far as a motive for doing good, I guess, or in being involved.
Well, and I'm thinking like if there's both could be good. Like, say it's serving people. Like I'm going to go help this person move because I would feel bad if I don't, or I feel like it's my duty. Nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Or just like this intrinsic desire to really help people that which I can't say that I necessarily have all the time. But that would probably be that's another way of probably ultimately more rewarding thing, right? I'm interested in like the the bonus. I just latched on that word, but can you describe it a little more? What that is? Like what is the bonus?
What's the draw?
Sure.
So I guess a lot of it I might attribute to my background and growing up in the church. Like I feel like growing up in the church, you're taught from a very young age to associate your good feelings with spirituality, with spiritual things. Mm-hmm. So that a lot is how I interpret I guess feelings of meaning or goodness. Mm-hmm. Like I get that through the frame of the spiritual practice or system that I'm used to and that I grew up with, and I still get that.
Yeah.
So like in that vein, it's easier for me to read, for example, The Pearl of Great Price and be really inspired by it.
Yeah.
Like I love a lot of the stuff about it. Whereas there could be something equally inspiring from another religious tradition.
Right.
But it's just not going to interest me as much because The Pearl of Great Price contains not only that inspiration, but all the other life experiences that go along with it, and like how my experience with it over time.
Yeah. Do you get that with the Book of Mormon as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
Me too. Yeah. This is sort of tangential, but I was just thinking with some conversations I've had recently that whatever the origins of it, the Book of Mormon is an extraordinary book, and I mean that counts for something. I mean, at a bare minimum, the sincerity of it. I mean, it seems very sincerely devout and worshipful and wanting to do good, and so it seems very genuine to me in that way. Anyway, that was just something I was thinking of. I like your points about religious experience and the emotions burning in the bosom. I think that sometimes we, at a certain level, when people become a little bit reflective or maybe willing to question some things, daring to question some things, that we might discount that a little bit. But I like seriousness you put on it. Because there's a stage of, I think, people thinking like, oh, I was just feeling warm fuzzy feelings at the time and concluded, oh, therefore this, that, and the other. Which, okay, there's a critique there, but it's also not nothing.
Right.
And it's much more than not nothing, right? It's actually something pretty big and something important. And that's interesting too. It sounds like that's very significant for your spirituality.
Oh yeah, very much, the most.
Yeah. So would you describe it as like the burning in the bosom, or kind of a warmth to it, or?
I don't know. It just depends on the situation. But there have been a lot of situations in my life where, if I'm keeping this interaction with God through prayer and like trying to feel the Holy Ghost, where I felt like I have been guided, and like who knows if I am or not. But the thing is, you have a belief in something like that, then you'll see it work, because it kind of proves itself subjectively.
Right.
And as long as it's not clashing with objective reality, like to me that's a valuable thing if I'm getting positive things out of it.
Yeah. You're just reminding me of in Alma 32, which has some pretty deep ideas in it. And it's one of those things where it's like embedded in Scripture, so we don't always realize that it's addressing a lot of things that big-time thinkers have gotten into throughout history. The objectivity and subjectivity definitely features very much in there, right? Because it's about emotions and things that you feel in your mind and in your heart. But there's this kind of objectivity of subjectivity, right? So, and I would look it up right now, but I don't want to derail things. But I'm pretty sure there's something in there that talks about, like, is this real? Yes, because you're feeling these things. Something to that effect, right? Where you realize it's not, it's talking a few levels removed, right, from the thing itself.
Yeah.
It's not saying directly, therefore God exists, or Christ is coming, because this was pre-Christ.
Yeah, keep talking. I'm going to look it up.
Okay, it doesn't conclude directly, through a certain degree of separation it implies that, but what's most important, and what it does basically prove in an incorrigible way, as in unable to be doubted, is that you're having this experience. And that's a place to settle or to dwell for a time and consider, and realize, okay, something's happening here that has some significance, has some power to it, and it might imply a lot of other things too, but at the most direct level is this experience that I'm having, and that's what I love about that chapter.
Yeah, it's so good. There's something. Let's see here. Yeah, so he's talking about the Word of God as a seed, and he stresses that the whole point is not to know.
Right. Yeah. And it relates to, even outside of...
yeah, there's too much to get into that.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. We'll find the verses later and we can have a follow-up discussion. But
sure.
Even outside of just religion, there's a lot that applies to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you were saying your relationship with God is very personal or interpersonal. Well, interpersonal relationships to start with are that's the nature of them, right? They're not really the type of things that you approach in a subject to object type of way. If I can name drop just briefly,
Of course.
Martin Buber, a philosopher, talked about the I-you versus I-it. So I-it are those things that you would approach in a very instrumental, rational way, where I-you relationships or encounters are different. There's not really things that you can take apart and analyze in the same way. And that applies both to people and to God. So by analogy, I think it makes sense that an irrational type of relationship to God or thought about religion makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it just, like you're saying, it can. I think these sort of phenomena are just really human. And it's easy to conceptualize it as with God, and that's what I'm used to. And that's what I believe in, whatever that means. But these feelings you feel that we interpret subjectively, I guess, as communion with God or the Spirit or whatever, you could do some kind of experimental test and see exactly how that's occurring. And like you were saying earlier, some people disconnect from their feelings like that, say, oh, that was just a feeling, there's nothing real about it. And that's true, but at the same time, with this dual mindset of rational and subjective, if God is working in the world, he's going to do it through rational, objective things. And you're not necessarily even going to be able to distinguish what is and what isn't.
Yeah.
So for me, I start with what I was brought up learning. Yeah. And then I apply that, and it changes over time. The big thing is with, the gay thing was the big break it all down, build it up again kind of experience. But everyone goes through some kind of evolution in what they believe. And why is my phone keep thinking I'm talking to it?
Stop interrupting, phone. Just throw it away. Do you think that the irrational side of that makes it a little bit difficult or scary to talk about sometimes to people?
Yeah, I think so. But the problem is people are going to, I'm convinced, so we talk about religion as being a certain set of things, like mythology and ritual practice and this kind of thing. But I'm convinced that on a fundamental level, everybody has some kind of religion, defined more broadly as they're a rational value system.
Okay. Yeah.
And in religion is a system you can embody that within, which I think is very useful as far as ordering it within yourself and having this sort of intersubjective reality among your community. It's a really important thing for society. Yeah. And people are going to try to order their subjective experience somehow. Right. And that's something I'm always kind of worried about talking about this too, because how do you draw the line between what I would consider a healthy religious experience and conspiracy theories, you know? Because it's the same kind of thing. People are wanting to order their subjective experience. I guess I would say that the difference is that's clashing with objective reality, so you have to let it go. Right. And just to go veer wildly on kind of a pet topic here, but that's what I really like about Mormonism as I experience it in my personal theology. Obviously, you could say that this is or is not the case, but for me, some of the big basic fundamental principles of my religious belief are that God is perfect and exists, and he reveals himself to people, and people are not perfect. So there's constantly room for change and new revelation, as we'd say in the church, which we pretend to believe in, but seem not to sometimes.
You mean that it goes on and develops?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's something that I find very fascinating, and I guess I see as a big contribution to what I sometimes call the Mormon moment, or Latter-day Saint moment in history, that this idea kind of injected into the stream of thought, development of thought, that, hey, the possibility of change. Yeah. It's like this recursive element that allows things to develop, because things are developing anyway, right, all the time. But then at this Mormon moment in history, it becomes self-aware, like, okay, yeah, things are developing and changing, and that's good.
Yeah.
We encourage it. That seems very powerful.
It's super powerful, and it's right there built into the system. That's another thing that really appeals to me about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you make a good point that we don't, as a people, we don't always appreciate it like we could. The power and possibility of that. But, I guess, was it President Uchtdorf who said, I can't remember the quote, something about taking advantage of what you're entitled to, or something like that. He gave the example of a guy who went on a cruise ship and brought his own meals and didn't take the.
I remember.
You remember that one?
Yeah, I remember thinking when I watched it, wow, that was me at my internship in Hong Kong because I was so poor.
Oh, but then he finds out after the fact that his cruise is all inclusive, right? So he wasn't taking advantage of everything he was entitled to. But yeah, I mean, I guess we don't always realize when we encounter things that don't make sense, that it's okay to look for development, because it's inbuilt, right?
Yeah.
And which is a nice thing. And I think you're right that's not only an escape clause, but it's actually it's a constructive element, right? That if you come across something that doesn't quite make sense or fit, then that's an opportunity to think through it and reinterpret it and figure something out best you can, which seems very powerful.
Yeah, I think it is.
Awesome. Well, what else? Are there other aspects of your religiosity or your religious outlook that you want to, or that you want your friends and family to know about? Or
I just a couple observations that I was thinking about on my way over here that are kind of cool or interesting. So one is, it's so interesting to me how, on the one hand, and people can't do this, and I don't understand why exactly, but on the one hand, I can rationally consider that, there could be nothing to Mormonism, nothing to Christianity, and that's fine. But for me, it's real because it works in my life somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I can talk with a total atheist about that kind of thing and feel comfortable, and yet I can also talk with my family in one of our discussions we had once about the temple and what it meant to us, and just speak about it freely like a real thing, and not feel like I'm being dishonest or duplicitous, or talking about talking with you basically, where I'm saying, yeah, it's possible that this is all objectively not real, and yet when I'm online talking to somebody on Facebook or in a forum or something, talking about an experience that I've had with the priesthood, giving a blessing that is real to me, and I don't feel like it conflicts with objectivity of it at all.
Yeah.
And I really liked, I feel like I'm just rambling, but I really liked, there's on Netflix, Joseph Campbell, there's a series of lectures.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
The thing that stands out to me most about it is actually not something that he directly said, but so he's talking in one or the whole series about the mythologies of indigenous people in the Americas. And the lady who introduces the lecture at one point says, I can't remember exactly, but just paraphrasing, she says, like, if you asked Joseph Campbell if these people actually believed their mythology, or not ask Joseph Campbell, but like if you asked them if they really believed it, like if it was literal, they wouldn't even know how to interpret that.
Yeah.
And I thought that's so interesting. That's like my experience, because I don't really think about it as literal, like it's real, because I feel like it operates in my life. I get feedback, but at the same time, I don't let it clash with objective reality, you know. But there's still enough value in it that keeps me going and believing and finding value in a very complex mythology, and to the point where I want to learn about it, you know, and try to figure out how things work the way they do.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And then another thing I wanted to talk about, and I've been trying to think how to fit it in, but I think it's a very powerful experience, or a very powerful example of the religious experience and the kind of feedback effect you get. And that's in the Mormon conception of the priesthood as the authority to act in God's name. And every once in a while in General Conference, somebody will say, now think about that and the reality of that. Mm-hmm. And it's true, but my goodness, think about it. You're really acting in God's name. For example, if you're giving somebody a blessing of healing, like you have to go along with the will of God, and yet supposedly you have this authority to make what he wants to happen.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is going to happen. But my train of thought is derailing. But the point I'm trying to get across is, like, it's almost presumptuous putting ourselves in the position to act as God would act.
Right.
And yet it's kind of not, in the sense that God's will be completed, right?
Right, yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen
regardless.
It's going to happen, so if it's me telling you, rise up and walk, and you rise up and walk, I have the authority to do that.
Yeah. Something this is not a Latter-day Saint example, but I was reading about Martin Luther, and something I found both touching and powerful was that he must have had like some type of anxiety disorder or depression, because he was just obsessed about his own sins before his tower experience, and he, no one could convince him that he was ever absolved. He could never do enough penance. But at some point, he had an insight that when the priest says, I don't know exactly what they say, but something to the effect of, I absolve you of your sins, you're forgiven. There's some statement there, right? And they're speaking on behalf of Christ, that is literally the case, and that you should believe it, because that is an authoritative statement, and that was very powerful for him, and I think he incorporated that into the Lutheran Church. But even as a Catholic, it was very powerful for him personally to have this epiphany, like, oh wow, when the priest is saying that, it's true. Like, I really am absolved. I really am forgiven. So I thought that was just a very powerful thing, and I think it kind of works this way. I've never been a bishop or seen the confession process, but I think that can be one of the benefits of it, right?
Yeah.
I know that confession's a very kind of controversial thing in the church for various reasons.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to keep in mind both psychological and religious benefits, and those may coincide very well, that sometimes you might get a Luther
like a teenage Luther who really needs to be told,
Yeah.
you're forgiven, you know, and have somebody tell them that, like another person tell them that.
Yeah.
And that seems to me like an example of priesthood power.
Yeah.
Literal power.
And
right?
it's also an example of that, like the real life objective utility of that subjective or ordering of your subjective experience. Because he's feeling that guilt.
Yeah.
And then he's able, through the mythology and through the ritual of the priests talking to him, to get through that. I mean, it is almost miraculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, you can ascribe it to God or not, but I mean, you can, why not? And if you don't want to, that's fine too.
Right.
And I don't think I made my point exactly clear about the priesthood healing, but like, if you tell somebody, in the name of God, rise up and walk, and they do, well, I mean, you can think of any reason that, like, objectively something happened that they should be getting up and walking, and you could write that off as though not really God doing it, it's just what's happening. But at the same time, like, you're putting yourself in that position to interpret it a certain way, and it's not going to clash with objective reality, because if you heal them and they're not healed, or if you try to heal them and they're not healed, I mean, you're not going to fool yourself into thinking they're healed, right?
Right. Yeah. That's well, and I don't know if this is what you were meaning, but I just was thinking of that. So God's actions are going to take place, but sometimes somebody being there and declaring it as such makes people realize that that's what it is. Right? Like if somebody's healed, we could just see that as, well, it's just one of those things, you know, it just happened. But somebody says, like, this is God acting in the world. That's a moment of revelation for people to open their eyes and see, like, whoa, something happened here, and it's something out of my control, and good that maybe you wouldn't otherwise realize. Right? Sometimes we can see things in different ways, and it takes something to open our eyes to it.
Yeah, it's all about the way you see things. Because what's going to happen is going to happen either way, right? So if seeing it a certain way brings you benefit, then let's do it, and not talk down about it. As long as it's not clashing with objective reality.
Right. Yeah.
Which all institutional religion does to some extent. I mean, it just naturally happens.
All science does to some extent too, right? That's that's now, of course, I don't mean to dismiss the differences, because religion has more, I guess, impediments to correction, where science, I guess, has, at least in theory, inbuilt mechanisms to facilitate that and self-correct. It doesn't always work that way, but at least in theory, that's how it should work. But yeah, I think you're right. There's, before you bump up against that wall, there's lots of I don't want to say just room for interpretation, but interpretation is a powerful thing. Like, because we could see the world around us as just a meaningless swirl of atoms, but that doesn't seem like that would be a very useful way of looking at things.
And even if people don't subscribe to a particular religion and or mythology, they still have some sort of operating subjective construct that is irrational, that's no better than religion for providing it. And
you know, you said something that I had said something similar to Alex in a previous conversation. Something like, religious people are aware of, like, the issues. Something to that effect, right? But but that's part of, because of the world we live in, in a secular age, right? So Charles Taylor wrote this book called A Secular Age, where he talked about a certain type of secularism is basically just this realization that there are alternatives, and that is a different type of world than, I guess the example that lady introducing Joseph Campbell was talking about, where if you live in an isolated community where there aren't alternatives, then you're not going to think about them. Or, I guess prior to modernity, Christianity, at least in Christendom, was just kind of the air people breathed and didn't really think about alternatives. So it wasn't like there was this...
it didn't really have the chance to bump against that objective wall.
But obviously we do today, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think at a certain point, people of a religious faith are going to at least consider the possibility that things aren't in the most objective sense, may not be the way that they think they are. At least, and then maybe you could just set that aside and say, well, that's not really interesting to my, what I'm after in my religious life, or we may focus on that and work around the reinterpretation. Some people do that, but people are interested in different things, even in religious. Like it sounds like your irrational preference is kind of, I've said before, like kind of where I want to get more later in life, to be more of like I guess kind of a contemplative religiosity, more focused on prayer than all the philosophy and theology that fascinates me now. But that's kind of my thing now. But
that's interesting though, and I think that's part of that subjective experience, and you're approaching it in a way that gets you definite results that you enjoy and that you're gaining.
They're very tailored to where I'm at. But I definitely I appreciate the way that you find the inspiration in things. Well, and I do too. I don't mean to say it's like foreign to my religious experience either. But I think that's important to consider. Like, okay, there's not always going to be a direct argument for certain things, and there doesn't have to be, and that's not a reason not to take it seriously or consider that somebody is irrational, right? That's very different from irrational, because many things, like I said, it's not really just the right application for that type of objective rationality.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of power too in applying that rational mindset to theology, like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, recognizing that at the base it is irrational. Like when you get down to the bottom of things, there's no reason to prefer that to anything else. But there really is something beautiful and stimulating and just great about working within all that and figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, I guess just in conversation, I guess we kind of had to theorize things just because we don't share the same mind. So, but are there any other, powerful religious experiences or things that you want to talk about? You don't have to, but I was just curious. Anything else that you think would be illustrative of your religious life?
I've had pretty powerful spiritual experiences, but I almost think the more meaningful thing is just the general attitude of openness to that and recognition that those feelings are legitimate, and you don't have to account for your values rationally, and you can't. And I feel like there's a danger in there's a danger in trying to rationally get at values. I don't think you can do it. And when you try, I think it can kind of hide the ball and let bad things happen.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's definitely true. All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about on this subject, or?
No, I feel pretty well unburdened, even
Awesome.
though I feel like it's just a rambling mess. But
Well, I mean, I think, especially with things that are intangible or, I guess, difficult to describe, that's probably appropriate. But it's very interesting for me because I actually didn't know a whole lot about your religious background or outlook on things, but so it's been very interesting for me. But very good. Well, cool. Thanks for coming on.
yeah, thank you for having me.